The JFK 35 podcast is made possible through generous support from the Blanche and Irving Laurie Foundation.
We have a long way to go in the space race. We started late, but this is the new ocean, and I believe the United States must sail on it. Some months ago, I said that I hoped that every American would serve his country. Today, Colonel Glenn served his.
At speeds of more than 17,500 miles an hour while flying 160 miles above Earth, John Glenn became the first American astronaut to orbit the Earth. 60 years later, we will revisit that historic flight and then speak with NASA astronaut Tracy Caldwell Dyson about the trajectory of NASA since Glenn's milestone moment, and what new discoveries are to come for the space agency. Next on JFK 35.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Hello, I'm Matt Porter. Welcome to JFK 35. 60 years ago, astronaut John Glenn launched himself into the history books with an orbital flight that took him around the globe 3 times in just under 5 hours. While Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was the first person to orbit the Earth, and Glenn's colleague Alan Shepard was the first American in space, Glenn's flight was still a major milestone. The successful launch, orbit, and then re-entry of Glenn's Friendship 7 space capsule was a huge accomplishment for the fledgling American Space Agency, which had been playing catch-up with the Soviets. But the mission wasn't without its risks. There were 2 major issues John Glenn had to deal with. Issues with the autopilot forced Glenn to switch to manual control for portions of the flight, and worse, NASA was concerned that the heat shield may have been damaged during the flight. Without an intact heat shield, John Glenn and his Friendship 7 capsule would burn up on re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. In an effort to keep the heat shield together, NASA told Glenn not to jettison the ship's retro package, which normally would have been released after reaching orbit. Here is some live audio from those moments.
This is Friendship 7, go into manual control.
Roger, Friendship 7.
This is banging in and out here, I'll just control it manually.
Roger. Friendship 7, this is Texas Control, do you read over?
Roger, Texas, go ahead.
Roger, reading 5-4, stand by for Texas.com.
Roger.
This is Texas Capcom Friendship 7. We are recommending that you leave the retro package on through the entire re-entry. This means that you will have to override the 05G switch, which is expected to occur at 04433. This also means that you will have to manually retract the scope. Do you read?
This is Friendship 7. What is the reason for this? Do you have any reason? Over.
Not at this time. This is the judgment of Cape Flight.
Roger. Say again your instructions, please. Over.
We are recommending that the retro package not be jettisoned. This means that you will have to override the 05G switch, which is expected to occur at 044353. This is approximately 4.5 minutes from now. This also means that you will have to retract the scope manually. Do you understand?
Roger, understand. I will have to make a manual 05G entry when it occurs and bring the scope in manually. Is that affirmed?
That is affirmative. Friendship 7.
Roger.
The mission ultimately was a success, with John Glenn splashing down over the North Atlantic Ocean. The entire country celebrated the achievement. It was at this point the United States took the lead in the space race and would not fall behind again. Here are JFK's remarks following the flight from the South Lawn of the White House.
I know that I expressed the great happiness and thanksgiving of all of us that Colonel Glenn has completed his trip, and I know that this is particularly felt by Mrs. Glenn and his 2 children. A few days ago, Colonel Glenn came to the White House and visited me, and he was, as are the other astronauts, the kind of American of whom we are most proud. Some years ago, as a Marine pilot, he raced the sun across this country and lost. And today, he won. I also want to say a word for all those who participated with Colonel Glenn at Canaveral. They faced many disappointments and delays. The burdens upon them were great, but they kept their heads and they made a judgment, and I think their judgment's been vindicated. We have a long way to go in the space race. We started late, but this is the new ocean, and I believe the United States must sail on it and be in a position second to none. Some months ago, I said that I hoped that every American would serve his country. Today, Colonel Glenn served his, and we all express our thanks to him.
Glenn became a national hero for the United States, and because of that, NASA did not want to risk Glenn flying again. John Glenn remained at NASA until he retired from the organization in 1974. After he retired, he was elected senator for his native state of Ohio and served until 1999. Glenn would see the stars one more time. In 1998, he served on the crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery on a 9-day mission where NASA would research the effects of space travel on an elderly person. At the time, John Glenn was the oldest person to reach space at age 77. Joining me now is another astronaut who has left her own mark at NASA, Dr. Tracy Caldwell Dyson, who has logged 188 days in space, including 22 hours of work outside the space station in 3 spacewalks. Dr. Dyson, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so happy to always have a member of the space program on, obviously with President Kennedy. NASA is a big legacy for him. And today we're here to talk a little about an anniversary, the anniversary of John Glenn being the first American to orbit the Earth. Before we get into that anniversary and that orbital flight, what do you know about the original Mercury 7? And as an astronaut orbiting the Earth now is routine, how would you describe what it might have been like for them being one of the first going up in those pretty antiquated vehicles?
Well, what I know about the first 7 is that, well, first of all, they were pretty brave guys, to say the least. In 1959, I think there was a lot of skepticism about this whole notion of going into space. And those 7 men, I mean, they believed in the mission. And had they not taken it seriously themselves, I don't know that we could have convinced the nation to do it. And so there's a lot to be said about the first 7 guys, that the Mercury 7. But that's the first thing that comes to mind. And what it must have been like for them, I think in part exhilarating, as well as rewarding, because all along the way, from 1959 to today, astronauts have been involved in the design and testing of new vehicles. And the first 7 were no exception to that. So I think that for them, having seen the process of designing and building these rockets that were in the capsules, to actually be riding in them had to be a mixture of exhilaration and reward.
The term space cowboy is probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, I think back in those days, it was a little different flavor of a spacefarer.
Getting to John Glenn and his orbital flight in the 1960s, it was very significant because it would be the first public display that really showed the Americans might be further ahead than the Russians. At the time, Sputnik had been successful and Yuri Gagarin had gone up there. John Glenn's flight was significant. But how do you view the significance of the flight now, 60 years later, as a member of the astronaut corps?
Yeah, having not been around when it was happening, but certainly reaping the benefits as a current astronaut, I think the significance of that very flight was in part the bravery that was demonstrated both in the man John Glenn, the core of his fellow astronauts, as well as just the program, the audacity to think of going to the moon and all the steps it took to get there, as well as our country taking that challenge on to do. So I think it demonstrated a lot of bravery and kind of set the tone for what we needed going further in exploration. And I think it also established momentum, certainly after that successful flight, knowing that there was more to do. It gave us a good push.
Certainly, the push in the right direction all going forward. For you, in the time you grew up, what astronauts influenced you? You came into this role, and I imagine, growing up or, in your collegiate life, as you started to think about this as a career, what sort of astronaut missions or astronauts influenced you growing up?
Well, of course, there were the well-known ones like Sally Ride and John Glenn, naturally, Neil Armstrong, etc. The ones in the program that probably don't get as much airtime, Krista McAuliffe. I mean, she was a teacher selected to go to space, and it was actually the first time in my life at that point I'd even thought about the astronaut program, what it was all about, simply because it was a teacher going up in space. And until then, it was only test pilots that I understood. And then I learned more about the astronaut program because of Krista McAuliffe and all of the attention paid to NASA during the workup to that mission. Other astronauts, one by the name of Mary Ellen Weber. She was of a similar background to me, but an astronaut prior to me. And I reached out to her because I knew a professor that she worked for, and she was very gracious in reaching out to me even before I applied. And then when I was selected, shared an office with her and worked alongside of her, and she became a fantastic mentor to me. So she became a role model as well. But even before all of this astronaut business, I was a student in university, both undergrad and graduate school, and all of my professors were a big part of shaping me and forming me. Barbara Finlayson-Pitts and John Olmsted were two people who not only gave me the right path to go on and mentored me along the way, but they kept in touch with me after I got here and have always been encouraging to me. So I could go on answering that question.
I wonder, like, when you finally end up sharing that office, were you kind of like, oh my God, I'm sharing an office with this person?
Yeah, it was astonishing to both of us. We weren't expecting it at all, but it was certainly a big joy.
Well, that's quite awesome. Now, we talk about the success of John Glenn's flight, and the 1960s was a lot of successes for the space program, but maybe one area where NASA didn't succeed very well early on was female astronauts in the program. We know actually from history that there were female astronaut trainees, sort of as a science, just to see how space preparation training would affect the female body versus the male body. But when they decided who would actually go on the missions, the Mercury 7, the male missions continued. That program of the first women astronaut trainees didn't. Now there's a clear, distinct directive for women in space, and the directive to have a first woman on the moon in the next set of moon missions. How do you feel about the opportunities are now for women in NASA compared to where they used to be?
Oh, well, they certainly are much higher than they've ever been. And I mean, as of today, and I've been in the program for over 20 years, and even when I started, it was not lost on me that I was there thanks to all of the females that had come before me, even before the first class of shuttle astronauts in this program, to include the Mercury 13 ladies. The perseverance and the fortitude that they had with these hopes, these tremendous hopes, and all the capability and the skill, that I can only imagine the letdown to begin with, but also I would hope that they would be encouraged by seeing the progress that has been made, all thanks to them. I don't think that there's a woman today in the Corps who thinks that it all started with them. We realize that there were a lot of women who sacrificed before us and had the disappointments because of the culture and the time. And if they were starting the program today, that there'd be no doubt. So I think our flights today are a tribute to what they persevered through.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that living in the library here, we see the photos of mission control, of the engineers and everyone, and just male dominated. And then you see, I was just watching the James Webb Telescope reaching L2 in the celebrations, and you look at those mission control, and like, it must feel good to know that NASA has come a long way since those early days.
Oh yeah, we all have a lot of growing up to do, right? And organizations like NASA are no exception to it. So yeah, it's nice to see progress like this.
So I want to get to a little bit of the time you had in space. Again, this is about John Glenn's first orbiting the planet. So what was it like for you the first time you were in space and saw the Earth from orbit for the first time?
Wow. I would say that it was almost ineffable. And I don't mean to be coy with that, but the planet and your view of it is so beautiful and vivid. I mean, unless you're really articulate with words, it's really hard to convey everything from what you're seeing, what you're sensing, to what you're feeling at the same time. So yeah, the first time I went into space, well, you also have this job to do, right? So you're focused, you're at the peak of your performance in terms of putting all your training to work. And oh, by the way, there's this fantastic planet out there that not many people get to see. So it's just like a cacophony of experiences that you're having all in the first moment that you see the planet.
And this is probably an obvious question, but like, how did your perspective change when you ended up landing back in Earth for the first time? Like, it must have been very different for you having had that experience.
I would say instead of my perspective being changed, because I'm one of those who recycles and does compost and really cares about the planet and all that kind of stuff. But it kind of added to my perspective, and in a very surprising way, it made me feel rather small and very undeserving, especially when I got attached to the space station and saw how magnificent that was. I mean, if the Earth wasn't enough, right? I mean, just to see this beautiful, fragile, gorgeous planet, and you're like, how is that there? I mean, how is that there in the infinity of blackness all around it? How is it there? And then you look at the space station and you're like, the tens of thousands of people, if not more, whose creativity and ingenuity and just their whole professional career went into creating this thing. And then you think about all the people on the ground who are at their consoles sending commands to it, and all the people prior to launching who had a hand in training you or designing the thing that's in there. I mean, it just blows your mind away to think about, wow, that's why you feel small and undeserving. It's like, what did I do? I filled out an application. I did what they told me. I got here. But I did nothing to do all of this. So when you're done drooling over the planet and you start thinking about, why am I here? All that kind of floods your thoughts.
It's got to just be insane to think about the amount of people that go into everything you do up there.
Yes.
And let's talk about living on the space station. JFK gave a famous speech at Rice University. It was the speech where he, basically said, we're going to get to the moon. But there was another part of the speech that I think deserves highlighting here, which is, he says, there is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as of yet. And, he says, it is the opportunity for peaceful cooperation that may never come again, are the words. And you lived on a space station maintained and manned by international crews. How do you think the International Space Station, the work you did up there, lives up to sort of JFK's hope for modern space agencies?
Well, I hope I'm not going out on a limb saying I think we exemplify that with the International Space Station. And like looking out the window, on board, there are no borders. And there could be political strife going on in our countries down on the Earth, but on board, we all have a common understanding of what our job is up there, and we do it. And we do it as a single crew, knowing that we have individual responsibilities in different modules to our different agencies, but we all come together as a crew. And I think that really speaks to peaceful cooperation, etc. Not to mention all the teams on the ground who have to coordinate with their respective counterparts and then bring the messages up to the space station, to the crew. But again, looking out the window reminds you just how much of a single planet we are, and with that mindset. And I think the International Space Station and all of the people involved in it, not just those that live and work on board, do everything we can to encapsulate that and share it with the entire planet so that we can promote that cooperation, that global partnership, that sense that we are a planet. We're not just countries or individuals, but we are a planet.
Yeah, you did some pretty interesting things on the space station, and I think one of the ones that I want to touch on is probably what would scare me the most, the idea of going out on a spacewalk. None of the Mercury 7s got out of their capsule, but you did. What is that like to do a spacewalk? And how many spacewalks, how many hours did you do?
I did about almost 23 hours over the course of 3 spacewalks. And they were intense. I wouldn't say that they were scary or horrifying or anything like that. It was because we're really well trained by the time we get to that point. But what was kind of intense about it, other than it being a spacewalk and all the risks involved with that, was that that series of EVA spacewalks were brought on because a pump had failed, and it was very unexpected. And so it was the first time that we had an unplanned contingency spacewalk to replace a critical component that if we didn't get it replaced, then we were at risk of, if we lost the other component, that its sister component, then we would have to start thinking about leaving the space station. That would really, really be bad. And so it was time critical that we got out the door. And at that time, we always had shuttles coming up. And so the manpower on board the space station was greater to help coordinate. So we had just the space station crew, myself and my 2 other US crewmates, plus our Russian crewmates. So we were the first time a smaller group. And then this was the first time this component had failed. And everybody on the ground had to go into a mode of creating the fix for this. And it wasn't like you could just pull that procedure off the shelf and tell us to do it. They had to create it, and they didn't have a whole lot of time to think about it. So we went out the hatch knowing that we were likely going to run into some snags and have to be flexible. And as a result, our spacewalks were about 2 hours longer than they normally are, 1.5 hours to 2 hours longer, just because we did run into snags. But that's what happens when you do, like John Glenn, I mean, they told me he could do 7, he did 3 orbits. you roll with the punches.
You talk about having a procedure and them having the creative procedure for you that it wasn't like available. We think about what NASA does. Like, I think about the James Webb Telescope just recently, because it was $10 billion. They sent it out there, and it's like everything has to be precise. Describe how NASA is able to succeed at projects like that. Where I feel like in the private sector, government in general, mistakes get made, things happen, but NASA is able to pull off unbelievable accomplishments at a level of detail that needs to be so precise. If you want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that's just amazing. I think it's fantastic.
I agree with you. I think it's amazing, and I don't know if I can put it in a nutshell, but I think we have people who are extremely committed, very professional, extremely hardworking, and they do what it takes to get the job done. It's not like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, gotta go home. I mean, we realize that we have pink bodies up in space, 250 miles above, and they need our help. And so the folks here are dedicated to keeping the crew safe. Number one, that's our number one priority, keeping the vehicle safe, and then getting the mission done. And people will do whatever it takes to get it done. And then, we rally, we surge when things like that happen. You do everything you can to get it together. And I think the right stuff, those guys who, when you got a problem and you got to fix it, or it was Apollo 13. That's the movie I'm thinking of, where they like come into the table with, duct tape and all sorts of widgets, and are like, fix it. That right there is the spirit of NASA. And I think that's a glimpse at what happens, especially on a more global scale today with the space station, because we've got, folks in Moscow, folks in Munich, folks in Tsukuba, Japan, in Montreal, Canada. I mean, we're all in this together, and everybody just we talk amongst the control centers, we talk up to the crew, and it's during the pump module failure, that indeed was a great demonstration of that, to include the science community, because we had these deep freezers that have all their science in it. And when this pump went down and took the power with it on half of our space station, we had to spend the whole night transferring power from one system to another, and then get some of the science out of these freezers and put them in the other freezers that were powered to save the science. And then what science we were supposed to do the following day had to be delayed because we had to now get ready for spacewalks and everything. And the science community was very gracious and pitching in and going, okay, here's what can be done to save our science, but cut out time so that you guys can get ready for this spacewalk. And it was just one of the most beautiful experiences, just from our little knothole from the space station. And we didn't get to see everything that was going on, but we heard about it when we came back. Just the kind of sacrifice that people made. I'm totally going on and on about this. It stopped me at any point, but I could just keep going on about just how people rally together in this program.
Well, it's amazing. And you talk about this cooperation, and it goes outside of like the political boundaries of the time, or like whatever's happening on Earth, you know, politically. What your work sort of transcends that with the partners that you're working with. And, you know, this leads into one of my questions, you know, as we're close to wrapping up, but like this cooperation that you have been able to foster with astronauts from other countries, scientists from other countries, including rival countries like Russia and China and all that. Like, there are political wins on the surface of the Earth, but you guys are able to do incredible science. How do you hope that maybe the work done at NASA in the spirit of cooperation that you have can convince, then you can go back to your governments, whether it's the US or elsewhere, to take action to save the planet on things like climate change?
Well, I think it's as simple as it sounds. I think if we just keep doing what we're doing, and that is, you know, as we stay longer and travel further into space, that we don't stop looking back at our beautiful planet and sharing what we learn and see about it with those that are on the ground. I've heard it said by any of my crewmates from whatever country, when they come up and they look out the window and they see the view of the planet, we all have the same feeling of this planet, as robust as it seems here on the ground, especially when you're surrounded by concrete and you're sitting in a traffic jam and all that kind of real life stuff. But when you're looking at it from the vantage point of 250 miles above the surface, you're above the atmosphere, and you just see this, what looks like a pristine heavenly body. You just can't help but want to take care of it. You can't help but want to protect it. And whatever form that takes, from just thinking about the trash that you throw away, to the kind of automobile that you drive, to just the way you regard your fellow man. If more people could experience that view, and I don't mean just seeing it in a two-dimensional photograph, I mean soak it in and see it and feel it, then I think that you would stand a better chance of changing hearts and changing habits. But NASA, they just keep on making space accessible in whatever way that means. And right now it means our partnerships with industry, commercial, academia, international, and it's helping to bridge that gap, get off the surface of the Earth and come look at it from afar.
Exactly. You know, and I'm a convert, but I think the one question that Kennedy got asked from the moment he pitched the moon all the way to today, the question that's always asked is like, why all this money being spent, you know, going to the moon, going to Mars, is it worth it? How would you answer that question to the cynical person who's saying like, tell me why all this money and this effort is worth it?
Well, I'd have to throw it back at the person, if it was a person, but you'd have to know what do they value. And if it's science and technology, well, there's numerous discoveries that can be made by going into space. And you just look at what we're doing right now as we utilize the space station as the national laboratory that it is, from, you know, biological, medical, physical sciences to agriculture, engine designs. I mean, you name it. There's an investigation. I mean, technology demonstrations. There's just so much to learn from there. But if health and medical is your gig, then, you know, the advances that can be made by studying the body in that kind of environment. Let me tell you, the human body is an amazing thing and so adaptable that we can learn so much just by monitoring astronauts just in a 6-month time frame. But as these missions get longer, in a year, to watch how the body changes and then goes back to adjusting to life in gravity, can reveal a lot about our bodies just on the ground, and promote longevity through what we learn. Partnerships and teamwork, if that's what you value, well, there's no greater global diplomacy right now than the International Space Station and all of the support that it has garnered through the work that we've done with the space station alone, and its predecessors like Skylab, Mir, etc. I mean, we're totally acting like a planet, not just countries that are, gathering at these high-level meetings and discussing our viewpoints, but the space program and all its partners are really acting like a planet. If you don't value that, it's like, I mean, where else are you going to find that? But just exploration in general, observing what was once unknown and learning more about it and ourselves through it. I don't know how many platforms are out there that provide that, but the space environment is rich with it. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but
it's really a good one though.
It takes learning what do you value, and I bet you there's an aspect of the space program and what we're doing today that can intrigue you.
All right. Well, I know you don't have much time left, but I want one more question here. And this, I hope, will really be exciting for you. We know that the International Space Station, won't be around forever. Its projected retirement has started. So we're starting to look to the next mission, then the future. So what are the next set of missions for NASA, sort of where it's headed, that excite you going forward in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, I'm pretty jazzed about the moon missions for sure, and not just because of JFK, but because it's so cool that we're going back to the moon. And I know all those guys that put their footprints there are probably saying it's about darn time. So yeah, I'm pretty psyched about that, and I'm super pumped to be in the astronaut corps during this time because I'm gonna know the person that goes there. So I'm super pumped about that. But just as a member of this organization, to see what we've been through for the last 20 years that I've been here, 20 plus years, to see where skepticisms were so high to today where people are wearing shirts with the NASA meatball on it. It's so cool to see the country rally again. It's a different time, so not everybody's going to be gathering around their TV, maybe their phone watching, the moon landings. But I think that it's a fun time to be a part of the space program and just be a part of this country that values such a thing. So going back to the moon, I think, is going to be a great reunion of sorts. And
well, that's pretty. I'm excited. We're all excited over here with moonshots and the NASA meatball. By the way, our audience can't see it, but I'm holding up my NASA water bottle with that meatball, which I never knew that was what you guys called it. Is that?
Oh yeah, that's the meatball. And the retro NASA is called the worm. So the worm. Yeah, that's called the worm. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, this has been a fun conversation for all sorts of reasons. Tracy, thank you for taking the time and joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's been a real honor to be a part of your JFK 35 podcast. I have fond memories of being at the JFK Library, and so being a part of your show today has been a real treat for me. So thank you.
Come back anytime. Thank you so much, Tracy.
You bet.
If you are interested in learning more about John Glenn's flight, you can visit our podcast page at jfklibrary.org/JFK35. We also have more information on our guest astronaut, Tracy Caldwell Dyson, and upcoming NASA projects. If you have questions or story ideas, email us at jfk35pod@jfklfoundation.org or tweet at us at JFKLibrary using the hashtag JFK35. If you like what you heard today, please consider subscribing to our podcast or leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.